And welcome to today's extended session. We're calling it a mini summit here on Am I the Only One Who's Struggling with Mental Wellness in the Workplace? We're so happy to have you here by your attendance today. It not only says to us that you wanted to join the conversation, turn it in the right direction. So whether that be for you specifically, or maybe you're steering your organization, we are tickled that you were here, and I think that you're going to be so glad that you can take away some of these best practices that are going to be shared today. My name is Holly Foxworth. I'm a registered nurse. I'm also the content manager here at Axiom, and I'm also joined by a fantastic panel of our subject matter experts. We have Natasha Bowman, who is our keynote speaker. She's also #1 voice in workplace mental health. We also have the Senior Vice President for Behavioral Health, Dr. Kertay, as well as Chief Marketing Officer, Dara Wheeler. And so before you meet them, real quick, let's go through what you're looking at there on your screen and kind of talk you through what to expect. There on the right side of your screen at the very top, you're going to see a box there. And so that is for an event that we're going to be having this next month. Dan Riley and the Radical Work team will be joining us for that. It's going to be on August. I should be saying April 20th, 4/20. How can you forget that one? At 1:00 p.m. Central. And so you can get signed up for that. All you have to do is press that button and it'll get you registered. You don't have to enter any additional information. You'll be set to go. Now, right below that, you'll see that there's a box. And so in that box, you'll see that there is a presentation deck. We always get the question, is this going to be recorded? Can I have a recording? Can I have access? So absolutely, the answer is yes. You can have the slide deck from today is there. We also have included the information about Natasha's new book, which will be coming out. I'm sure she'll talk more about that maybe in her keynote address that's there, but basically I believe it's called Crazy AF. Natasha, correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but I think it's
right.
Crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, Crazy and Crazy as AF. And so and it kind of goes through how it is that you can go from having the burden of feeling like you're overwhelmed, and how it is that you can manage your mental wellness within your workplace. So I encourage you to check that out. And again, I'm sure that she's going to give us some additional information that's there. Most importantly, I wanted to mention that we do give great gifts for everybody that asks questions. So ask some great questions. If you have a statement you want to make, if you have a question, you need to be anonymous, type that into the box, send it our way, and I'll make for sure that a gift comes to you. So with that being said, then let's go ahead and just meet the panel. Dr. Les, why don't we start with you? Do you want to introduce first?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Les Kertay. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I'm Senior VP for Behavioral Health here at Axiom, helping the team build out workplace mental health solutions. And that's really been I've done clinical work for a very long time. Last 20 years or so, I've been focused on workplace mental health, and that's my passion.
Awesome. And then how about we go to Dara next, and we'll wrap it up with Natasha then.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everybody. My name is Dara Wheeler. I am Axiom's Chief Marketing Officer, and I've been doing various things at Axiom for about 17 years now. And when we were all going through the last chaos of the last 3 years, one of the things we realized at Axiom was that for our own clients and for ourselves, we were missing a piece. And the piece was a big piece, and that was mental health and behavioral health support for not just our clients, but our own employees. And the why behind why we're here today is because we realized that this gap needed to be filled for many, many people, and we needed a way to change the conversation. So I'm really excited to have Natasha join us again today and continue this conversation. It's never going to end. There's no end point. We will continue to evolve and get better and work together and try to improve the offerings for employees at work and make this make a difference in this. So I'll pass it over to Natasha.
Awesome.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me back. I am so overwhelmed and yet humbled to have platforms such as this to share my story, and very similar, and you're here in just a minute, what Dara said, these past couple of years have definitely shifted our mindset to how we take care of our mental health. It's been a lot that's happened, and we're going to go deep into that discussion with me. So thank you again for having me here. So,
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll just go through kind of the discussion topics here, and then you should see a poll question that's going to be coming up next. We're going to go through why the way we work, why it doesn't work anymore, some of the common mental health problems that you may see in the workplace, and then also breaking the stigma, some of the legal, ethical considerations, and then also how it is that you can measure that impact, because the measurement is a big piece that many struggle with. So you should see a poll question that should come up on your screen. And so if you would like to answer that, that'll give you about 2 minutes that you can answer that. But Natasha, you are welcome to go ahead at this point and take it from here.
All right. Make sure you answer that poll question, because we definitely want to go into your responses at the conclusion of my presentation. And be sure, I'd love to hear when I'm with the other panel members, if you have any Q&A, to drop those in there as well, and I'll address them at the end. So today we're going to be talking about, am I the only one struggling with my mental health? And I know at times it may seem like you're the only one, because we have a habit, especially as professionals, we show up, we smile, we're on these Zoom calls, but on the inside, something different is happening. And, sometimes we have what I like to call those Monday morning blues, where, we're thinking, oh, do I have to go to work today? Or I'm struggling to get out of bed just to get started. And we're going to dig deep into why we may be having those thoughts and feelings. Is it something related to us internally in our personal lives? Or is it something professionally related that we should be addressing, but sometimes we're a little reluctant to address how our workplace environment impacts our mental health? And what I want to talk about today, based upon my story and how I ended up being a mental health advocate, is how we can really talk about those things that some of you may have been experiencing today, or Monday or Tuesday, whatever day it was, when you woke up. Perhaps it was you're working in a toxic or abusive work environment, or perhaps you're experiencing burnout. And we're going to go deep into that, because I hear that word so much as I go on my journey of sharing my story. Or maybe it's job uncertainty, especially if you're working in the tech industry. It seems like every day that we wake up, another tech organization is announcing layoffs. We're hearing about the economy and the feds and all of that. So we're wondering what's next for us from a financial standpoint. And that uncertainty especially plays a role in our ability to maintain our mental wellness. Perhaps you lack work-life harmony. And notice that I didn't use the word balance, because I don't think there's a such thing as balance. Because when I think of balance, I think that you got to have the same amount of weight on this side that you have on that side. So it's like this. What we want is harmony. And that harmony is made of beautiful things within both your professional and your personal lives that come together. And that's what we want to aim for. Maybe you don't feel like you have the support from either your manager, your family, or whoever that may be, in order for you to maintain your mental wellness. And many of us have been in that predicament before. Perhaps, and Holly talked about this earlier, we're going to talk about those legal aspects, but perhaps you're experiencing harassment and discrimination at work. And if you are, that definitely plays a role in your mental health. I've been there before. And a recent article shows us that your manager at work has more of an impact on your mental health than your therapist or your primary care physician. So they play an important role on our day-to-day lives. And we're going to dig deeper into those. There may be other stressors or triggers that give you those Monday morning blues or Sunday night blues, or whatever day it may be, when you're not feeling your best self as it relates to your mental health. But believe me, there is hope for us being able to, as Holly alluded to my new book, go from being burned out, unmotivated, and unhappy at work to reclaiming our mental health at work. That's what we want to do. And I have been working with mental health professionals, workplace culture experts, and legal teams in order to put together your formula for success. But before I go into this, right, just so give you a preview, we're going to talk about what and why is mental health important. And I think we already know the answer to that, but just to make sure, we're going to reinforce it. How to maintain positive mental health at work and when you need to seek professional help. But before we go into that, I want to share my personal story of how I got on this subject of mental health, which about 3 years ago, I never imagined would be my life's work. Some of you, if you've joined one of my talks before with Axiom or another organization, may have heard this story before, but it's worth repeating, I think. The more that I tell the story, I find that it resonates with more and more people. Because you see, let's say February, early March of 2020, I thought that I had checked off every professional goal imaginable, and I had achieved a lot of professional success. I was an accomplished lawyer. I had been in executive positions in the C-suite at Fortune 500 companies and healthcare organizations. I had published my first book. I had done a TED Talk. I was even headed to Indonesia because I had been awarded or named one of the top 30 global gurus in management. So I've got that ticket. I'm ready to go. I'd already done some international speaking. I was just on top of the world. But we know what happened in March of 2020. The world came to a pause. That disease that we thought was miles away made its way to the US and stopped everything in its tracks. And all of my projects with my clients were canceled. My speaking engagements were canceled. That trip to Indonesia was canceled. And for the first time in my life, my brain just had nothing to do. And I learned that my brain had not been trained to abstain from doing anything. And while the rest of the world was busy having fun, making TikToks and jamming a DJ D nice at Club Quarantine, my brain was going in a different direction. And without having my professional success, I didn't know who I was, and I was searching for my identity. And I didn't even know how to identify. I had a loving husband and a great kid at home that was home with me, but it'd been so long since I'd really been in that role full time that it just couldn't connect. And even got to a point at one point that I was like, well, maybe I don't even want to be a mother and a wife anymore. I want to explore other things and other people. And that wasn't like me. And over the course of the next several months, my mental health continued to deteriorate until in January of 2021, I was just in such a bad place mentally, still trying to find that identity. Although my business had picked up after the murder of George Floyd, and I had doing a lot of work around race and racism in the workplace, that still didn't help, which again was just very, very strange and odd to me. So in January of 2021, my brain told me that I no longer wanted to be on this earth, and I attempted suicide. And after that suicide attempt, I was hospitalized in an inpatient psychiatric facility. And it was there that I learned that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That diagnosis, after I learned more about it, made a lot of sense to me. I learned that a lot of that professional success that I told you about was actually driven by my bipolar disorder diagnosis. I was kind of living my life in somewhat of a bipolar manic episode. In days that I couldn't get out of bed, and I attribute it to burnout, I was actually in a bipolar depression episode. So everything started to come together for me as I looked back on my life. But I got to tell you, being diagnosed with a mental illness really was jarring to me. And I started to stigmatize myself and thought, will I ever be seen as a credible, capable, or confident or competent person anymore? And I thought, I'll never come out of the shadows of this. I'll never unmask myself. But with the support and encouragement of my providers and my husband, I decided to look at the bright side of things and research other people who not only were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but who were also diagnosed with other mental health conditions. And what I found was that there were tons of people who were living successful and thriving lives with mental health conditions, from Winston Churchill to Mariah Carey, people that I admired and listened to the radio every day or watched on TV. And I said, well, you know what? If they can do it, so can I. And I decided then to make my story known publicly. I shared my story on my LinkedIn platform. At that time, I had about 80,000 followers, but I put it out there, posted a professional picture, and captioned it, "This is the face of bipolar disorder." Now, that was a scary moment because I didn't know how everybody else was going to respond. I had done my research, but I didn't know if anybody else had and what they would think of me. But to my surprise, I received overwhelming positive feedback, people thanking me for sharing my story. And most importantly, people telling me I've experienced the same thing, or I have a family member that's going through the same thing. It was almost like another Me Too movement. And that let me know that I'm not the only one struggling with my mental health. And guess what? If you're watching this here today, you're not the only one either. So, with that, that has been my life work, my journey, my mission. I founded a nonprofit around it. I was named, as Holly said, a LinkedIn top voice for workplace mental health. And I've written a book about it that's going to be released in May. So, why is it important that we talk about mental health, right? Why is it important that we break the silence and break the stigma, right? And a question that I always get, because you hear these three words used very often, and but what's the difference between mental health, mental well-being, mental illness? And it's important that we understand those differences. And I'm going to go through them very quickly because as I use that language throughout this program, and when I engage with the panel and we're using this language, it's important that you understand that, right? So mental health refers to a person's overall psychological and emotional well-being. It includes the ability to cope with life's challenges, maintain positive relationships, and feel a sense of purpose and fulfillment, right? And mental health is not just the absence of mental illness, it's a state of positive mental and emotional well-being, right? And that's what we're talking about. When we say we're struggling with that, we're saying we're struggling with being able to cope with the challenges that life has to bring us. We don't have that sense of purpose, right? We're not in a positive state of emotional well-being. Whereas mental well-being, it does refer to your happiness, contentment, and satisfaction with life, right? And it encompasses a wide range of factors, including your physical health, your social relationships, your personal fulfillment. And while mental well-being is closely aligned with mental health, it's a little bit broader of a concept. And then there's mental illness, right? So mental illness refers to a range of mental health conditions that affect a person's thoughts, emotions, and behavior. And it can range from mild to severe, and it can impact a person's ability to function in their daily lives. Remember, I told you there were times where I just felt like I couldn't get out of bed. And sometimes I still feel that way. And I have to decide, Am I struggling with my mental health? Or is this a part of my bipolar disorder? And we're going to talk about later why it's important that we make that distinction, right? But what I do know is if you're dealing with a mental illness, if you do determine that it's due to a mental health condition or mental illness, then you definitely need help from a qualified healthcare professional. Now that we've got those three definitions down pat, let's continue on so we know the difference as we are referring to them. But let's just go back to not feeling alone, right? And I thought that these were some great statistics and research that I found, so that if you're still out there stigmatizing yourself and you don't want to talk about your mental health at work or at home, I want you to see just in numbers why you should be talking. You're definitely not alone, because depression and anxiety results and has resulted in $1 trillion in productivity loss. So think about how many people that equates to for that number, $1 trillion in productivity loss. Think about this statistic: 75% of workers report workplace stress without resources to manage it. 75%. Another 70% of workers experience a mental health issue, such as anxiety and depression. 70%. So if there's 10 people in the room, that means that 7% of those are experiencing these. And then we have about 16.8 million Americans who've had one plus major depressive episode in 2020. Going back to that year that I just talked about, I was one of those people. And then finally, mental health conditions are the leading cause of disability and responsible for productivity loss than chronic health conditions. And when we talk about chronic health conditions, we're talking about diabetes, heart disease, those types of things. So mental health leads productivity loss. So when we think about, and are you alone, looking just at these facts and figures, you'll see you certainly are not. In fact, we are the global majority when it comes to this. So that's why it's so important that we talk about it, because just like I said before, when we don't talk about it, it impacts our job performance, right? We talked about that productivity loss. We talk about our mind being preoccupied with other things. Why am I feeling this way, et cetera, then being able to focus on our work. Sometimes we're thinking about, well, what are other people thinking of me? Are they noticing a change in my behavior? And speaking of that, it impacts our relationship with our colleagues, right? If we're not our usual selves, if we're not dealing with our mental health struggles, if we're burned out and all of those things that I talked about in that first slide, dealing with harassment, discrimination, lack of support, then it's hard for us to completely show up and be able to be 100% for ourselves, let alone for the people that we work with. Mental health conditions and struggling with your mental well-being can also impact your physical health. It can show up as body aches, headaches, gastro symptoms. A lot of times, you go to the doctor and you ask, like, I'm having all these symptoms. They run all these tests and they come back with nothing. Think about it. I can't see your hands, but raise your hand if you've ever experienced that. You've gone to the doctor with all of these symptoms and everything comes back just fine. Well, guess what? There's no blood test, right, that can test the state of our mental health. And a lot of times our mental health, struggling with it, will present as physical symptoms, right? So we've got to pay attention to that too. And then job satisfaction, right? Especially if you have those workplace stressors and triggers that I just talked about, and it's impacting your mental health, you're not going to be satisfied at work. You can love the job that you do. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked in a work environment where I absolutely loved the work that I did. I just didn't love the environment that I was doing it in, right? Because I was experiencing some of those things, that toxic work environment, abusive managers, harassment, discrimination, burnout, right? The list goes on and on and on. So it's important that if we're experiencing any of these things, that we have awareness of what's happening, and that we address it. Because the longer that we're silent, the more dangerous and harmful it can become to us. I just told you my story of what my result was, and resulting in a suicide attempt, resulting in being an inpatient hospitalization. And when I looked back and thought about some of the symptoms that I experienced and things that I didn't feel comfortable being transparent and vulnerable about, if I was, and that included some physical things that presented, if I was and had that early intervention, would I have gotten by diagnosis and treatment and medication and saved myself and my family from going through such that traumatic event that we went through in January of 2021. So again, that's why it's so important. But like I said before, even if you are experiencing some of those workplace stressors or triggers in the workplace, I believe there's hope, and that you still have the opportunity to reclaim your mental health at work and maintain that positive mental health at work. And we're going to go through how you can do that. This is the good stuff. This is where you take out your pencil and paper, take notes, because you're going to use this before you get the book, right? Because I want you to get the book that's going to go through this, but I really want you to start today on some of these things. And we're going to look at it from three perspectives, right? Because I kind of feel like it's in this Venn diagram, it's an overlap to your own mental well-being, knowing the signs and symptoms that you're struggling with your mental health, and that requires a certain amount of awareness, right, about how we're feeling. The mental well-being of others, right? Because if you have a teammate that's struggling with their mental health, they're not giving their optimal performance. And I always like to say that an organization is only as strong as its weakest player, right? So we all have accountability and responsibility for everyone, right? We want to make sure that we're providing a safe space for others to discuss if they're struggling with their mental health. And then there are those, being able to identify if there are those environmental factors that I just went through, and how you can address that too. So first, let's talk about our own mental health. And before I go into burnout, let me ask you a question. If you wake up one morning and your shoulder's hurting, and you wake up the next morning, your shoulder's hurting, and the next morning, and the next morning, and the next morning, at some point, you're going to go to an intervention for that. You're going to go seek some sort of medical intervention. You're going to go to a primary care physician or your emergency room, and you're going to say, hey, I need help. I don't know what's going on with this shoulder. I thought I slept on it wrong, but it's just not getting any better. We have to be the same way when it comes to acknowledging our own mental health. And one of the things that I've heard very, very lately of people that are really, really aware of, and I'm glad that they are admitting that, is burnout, right? And guess what? Burnout is actually considered a medical diagnosis, believe it or not. It was classified as such, I want to say, by the World Health Organization just a few years ago. So, if burnout, if you're feeling, depleted, you're not having the same job efficacy as you usually have, that's probably burnout. And there are stages of burnout, right? And this is kind of a diagram that I came up with as we think about the stages of burnout. And I liken it to the stages of a fire, all right? So the first stage is ignition, right? And so a lot of times when we start a new job or we start a new project, we are really, really energized, pumped up. We're ignited by these things that you see going into that flame. We feel fulfillment, we feel passion, motivation, right? And promise, right? Especially when you're starting a new job. We're ready to show them what we've got. We've gotten our education, our experience. We're ready to do this and we're hitting the ground running, right? But then we go into that growth phase because not only we realize are we doing the things that we were hired to do, those projects, those tasks, and those responsibilities, but we find that our responsibilities tend to grow. And we find that we're doing more things than we thought we were going to be doing on that job. That's okay. We still have that burning passion. It's still growing. We'll take that on. We're not going to say anything because we don't want to seem like we're not a team player, right? But that burning is there, right? That flame is growing. And then at some point, that flame is fully developed because we're doing our job, we're doing maybe some other responsibilities. Then we've got some personal responsibility that's going there, and you kind of feel like your head is on fire, right? You're just going miles a minute, you're not sleeping, you're overwhelmed, you're overburdened. But again, you've not put in any intervention. You don't feel like you don't have permission to say, hey, I'm taking on too much. Hey, I need someone to help me prioritize. So again, you're walking around totally inflamed. But as with any match, after a while, right? And if you don't believe me, when this is over, take a match, light it, just let it burn and let it burn. You're going to see it's going to start small, it'll get bigger, and then eventually it will just burn out as we see here. This is the decay stage. And once you are burned out, you're kind of useless to yourself and to others, right? We can't take this burned out match and ignite anything else. We can't ignite anyone else. We just don't have, going back to this first one, that fulfillment, that passion, that motivation, that promise that we had to begin with. So we're just kind of walking around doing that buzzword, kind of quiet quitting, and like, you know what? I'm going to stop doing all this other stuff. I'm going to do the bare minimum. But that's not the way that we want to operate. Engaged employees, we want to have that same passion, desire, and fire that we have during this first stage. So how can we prevent burnout? Because that's the number one question that I get. And a lot of people tell me if I can prevent burnout, then it's possible that I can then manage other parts of my mental health. So it starts with intentionality, right? And here are my tips and tricks when it comes to intentionality. It's about scheduling your day with intention and purpose, right? There is a time and there is a place for everything, and we need to be intentional about that. And work schedules should be performed during work hours unless there's something extremely important that's happening, right? But here's the thing, you can determine what those work hours are, right? Working with your employer, a lot of times we extend our workday on our own, not because our employers have asked us to, just simply because we have so much to do that we want to get done. So again, if we're intentional about it, it's looking at it and saying, I've got a lot going on here for the time that I have allotted. Now's the time for an intervention. Now's the time for me to work with my manager to see what can I put off till tomorrow, or what projects can just be put on hold, right? Some people, they feel good if they do work at night sometimes, like after the kids are in bed, because you feel better if you're it. That's okay, right? We don't have to fit into any sort of box, but it's ensuring, right? Going back to that harmony part, that you are integrating all the beautiful things of your life, the beautiful and satisfying parts of your job, the beautiful and satisfying parts of your personal lives together, and be intentional about that, right? Whatever that looks like for you. The second intervention to burnout is knowing your triggers, right? Which is very, very important, is that we understand our triggers in the workplace. We get burned out if we are engaging or experiencing things that are triggering to us, even if we're not necessarily overwhelmed with the work that we have. Let's say you've got a great schedule, but someone's walking in and they are, engaging in microaggressions, or you feel like you're being the recipient of harassment or discrimination, right? Those are the types of things, going back to that first slide, they contribute to burnout, because not only are you trying to exceed expectations in your job, but you're also taking on these unnecessary burdens and triggers that you really, and stressors that are taking up your mind space. So knowing those triggers, right? Knowing what's going to take up, or as they say on TikTok, things that will live rent free in your head that shouldn't be there. Knowing that and intervening on those will give you the mental space you need to focus in on what's important, right? So for instance, if someone comes to you and they keep microaggressing you, letting them know that what they're saying is offensive to you and why, and using that as an education moment. They continue to do so, then escalating that, right? So that you can get help to intervene with that, right? So again, understanding your triggers, very, very important. And not just understanding and knowing, but intervening with them, right, will help you to prevent burnout as well. Next is to build your support system. And that's probably a place that I have so much room for growth, because I just kind of feel like, oh, I'm the only person that can see in my head the way that I want things to get done. And I don't lean on my support system the way that I should. But needing, asking, and accepting support is not a sign of weakness, right? It helps you to build resilience and endurance. And if you surround yourself with people who are rooting for your success, exerting positive energy, and will give you candid feedback and or contribute other positive ways of your life, that helps you with preventing burnout. Because when you have that support system, you have someone that's telling you, hey, you're taking on tasks that you don't need to, right? So let's think about this, for instance. There's a such thing called invisible task. And this is Women's History Month. And I've heard so many women talking about this in the workplace, where we take on these invisible tasks, meaning if we're in meetings and there needs to be a volunteer to write minutes, guess what? We volunteer for that. Oh, people need lunch. Guess what? We're going to order 5 different lunches with 5 different types of dietary things, right? Those are those invisible tasks. When you surround yourself with a support system, both inside of work and outside of work, that can say, hey, you know why you're burned out? Because you keep taking on things that you don't need to at all the time. You should let somebody else take care of that for you. Guess what? You've just freed up some time in your day. You've just freed up some space in your mind, right? So building that support system. Another advantage of having a support system is knowing that you have people who know you. Because a lot of times we have changes in our behavior and we don't all the time recognize them initially. So when I first went into my bipolar manic episode during the COVID pandemic, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't see it. My speech was being escalated, going really fast. I had blurry eyes, I was told, but my husband recognized it. And he was like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So the point of that is sometimes we don't see these changes in ourselves. So we need others to recognize those changes in us, right? And when they do that, to say, "Hey, you just don't see yourself," and we take the time to reflect, again, that support system is a great intervention, not just for burnout, but for mitigating a mental health crisis as well. Our next intervention for preventing burnout is engaging in self care, right? And I know this probably seems like it's self explanatory, but we don't all the time do that. I know I'm very guilty of not engaging in self care because I'm working all the time. Holly asked me before this call, "How are you writing books and doing that and doing that?" Well, guess what? Because I'm skipping out on my Zumba, right? So we've got to engage in self care. And when we do that, right, it provides that sense of control and a break from the daily grind, which can help to prevent burnout. And it can also provide that much needed mental and emotional breaks from those stressors of life that I've been talking about. And I will say though, even though I may be very guilty of not engaging in the self care that I like to do, such as my Zumba or walking, let me just emphasize how important or the current perspective of how we look at ourselves, right? Now, I want you to answer these questions to yourselves. How often do you get your blood work taken? You know, most of us go annually to get our blood work, to see our levels. Do we have any nutrition deficiencies, et cetera, et cetera? We may go to see our gynecologist on an annual basis. We may go for a prostate exam if you're of a certain age on an annual basis. We get our teeth cleaned annually. We get our eyes checked annually. These are things we get reminders from the people that do it. We have it on our calendars. We are constantly seeing TVs on the Today Show telling us to go do that. Daily, we get up, we brush our teeth, we do our hair, we put lotion on our body. We wouldn't dare step out looking some kind of way. So in many ways, we're very, very committed to our physical appearance and our physical health. We have got to maintain that same sort of commitment as it relates to our mental health. So remember, I went through those definitions of mental health, mental well-being, and mental illness. And I said that last one, you definitely need intervention by a provider, a mental health provider. But here's the thing. We should be doing that anyway, right? We should be minding our mental hygiene just like we do our physical hygiene. We wouldn't show up to work with bad breath, our hair not combed, right? Not taking a shower, et cetera, et cetera. But what does that look like? What does that mental hygiene look like for you? And it's on an individual basis, right? There's no standard care. You know, on the Today Show and Good Morning America and all that, there's all this debate about, oh, how often do you wash your sheets? How often do you wash your jeans, et cetera, et cetera. It varies from person to person. But I want you to think about, what does daily mental hygiene look like for you? And are you prioritizing it like your physical hygiene? Are you walking into spaces such as your work and other places, and you haven't taken care of your physical hygiene, your mental hygiene, like you have your mental hygiene? I want you to think about that, and I want you to make notes of what that looks like for you. Our second thing is to remember on our Venn diagram is to also be cognizant of the mental well-being of others. And again, I've already given you an example of an I've had. And if someone approaches you and says, hey, I'm struggling with my mental health, or you notice someone is struggling with their mental health, you should not be hesitant to approach them to say, not, hey, I think you're struggling with your mental health, but to say, you don't seem your usual self, right? And here are some of those do's and don'ts in engaging in that behavior, right? So, first of all, you want to listen to learn, right, about what they're going through. And what they may explain to you may resonate. It may sound familiar. It may be something that you've gone through in the past, or you know someone else has gone through it. Now is not the time to share that experience just yet, right? You want to make sure that you're learning about their experience, and not just inserting, oh, yeah, I know how that feels automatically, because a lot of times just being able to share and get it all out will go a long way. You also want to ask meaningful questions. There's a lot of things about my condition, bipolar disorder, that a lot of people don't understand, that they only see on TV or read about Britney Spears or Amanda Bynes or some of those other things, but there's so much more to it. So ask meaningful questions. Just don't make assumptions when someone shares something about you. Ask meaningful questions, because that's going to help you, right, as you are able to provide the support that they need, which leads me to the next one. Don't pathologize, right? We're all Google doctors. We read about mental health a lot. We think we know things like, oh, yeah, I think you may be bipolar, you may be depressed. Don't say that. Don't pathologize. That's very, very important. Again, you want to listen to learn. You want to ask questions, and then you want to validate their feelings. Right? We've got to remember, certain things that trigger certain people may not trigger you. You may have a certain level of resilience about certain things, while others don't. So never invalidate someone's feelings, even if you wouldn't respond or feel the same way in the same situation, right? That's their feelings. That's the way they feel, and they have every right to own those feelings. And then you want to ask how you can support them, right? Don't make assumptions about what support is needed. Ask, how can I support you? And you may have done enough just by sitting there and listening to them. And that's okay. And I'm sure that they are more than appreciative of that. It may be that, hey, you may have some workplace stressors that they may have some workplace stressors and triggers that they're sharing with you, but maybe they're new to the organization and they don't feel comfortable escalating it. But you've been there for a while. You have more credibility. Maybe you're the one that can escalate their concerns to the right people. That, along with that intervention, right, alone could be enough. There's different ways that they may need your support. And then last but not least, if you do have suggestions or other resources, then you share it with them. Have you considered the EAP, Employee Assistance Program? Have you considered some sort of app that maybe you have access to? Have you considered escalating? Have you considered taking time off, right? Those are the different levels of support that they may need as you're supporting your coworkers through there, right? And then last but not least, when we're looking at that Venn diagram, and it's a crossover between our own mental wellness and the well-being of others, is our environment, right? And I've talked a lot about this and how it can impact your mental health, whether it's lack of empathy. And I encourage you, if you're a manager or a leader on this call, I'm going to share a secret with you. As an HR professional, and even as a labor and employment law attorney and expert for many, many years, in fact, through my whole career, I've advised managers, hey, if someone comes to you and say they're struggling with their mental health or whatever, don't engage in that conversation. Immediately send them to HR, immediately send them to EAP. And we do that because we want to avoid legal liability. But as I revisit that, I have a different perspective, because we're not providing equity as it relates to mental well-being and physical well-being. Think of this. If someone approaches you and says, hey, I've been diagnosed with cancer, you would never, as a manager, dismiss them. You would show empathy and support. You would want to know more. What stage? What's your treatment plan? What can I do to support you? We've got to normalize that conversation just like we do with physical illnesses, just like we do with mental illnesses. And we can balance that without running the risk of legal liability if someone approaches us, right? We just need training for managers to do that, which I offer through my company, right? But again, when I look at the research that I've done through my nonprofit and talking with people, the lack of empathy from management is the number one reason why people don't share, because they don't get the empathy that they expect in return. So when we think about mental health, as I wrap up today, it's not a journey. I used to call it a mental health journey, but it's really a continuum, right? It continues. Because if you think about it, from mental health to mental well-being, mental health conditions or mental illness, right? We're all on different paths, right? We're all in different seasons right now. Before this call, I was talking to Holly and others, like, what's your weather there? I'm here in New York. It's kind of cold and rainy. You know, we're all in different things. So on this continuum, you may be entering in different spaces, but likely somewhere in during your lifetime, you're going to be on one of these places on the continuum. You may be taking measures to prevent a mental health crisis, right? And you want to take measures to prevent harm, triggers, trauma, or other variables from disrupting your mental well-being, right? And we've talked about what some of those stressors or triggers may be, but you want to take prevention methods. You want to establish a relationship with a mental health provider, just like we do with our dentist, just like we do with our hairdresser, right? And they get to know, they know, like, hey, something's different. Your hair is dry. What are you doing differently? If you've already established that relationship, right, with a mental health provider, and it's nothing wrong with going to therapy and just talking, and they get to know, they have that chart in front of you, just like your primary care prevention. We want to do those things that prevent burnout, right? We want to do the things that we enjoy. We want to engage in work-life harmony. Maybe you're in treatment right now, right? Just like I am, where I am seeking treatment to address my bipolar disorder. Or perhaps you're seeking treatment to address some harm or trauma that you've experienced in the workplace or in your home. Or maybe you're healing, right, because of some sort of trauma or trigger, right? You could be healing from grief, a broken relationship, rejection, abandonment, or negative workplace experiences. You could be on a healing, and that's well. Or you can be just maintaining, where you're taking those measures to prevent stressors to your mental health. You're being proactive and reactive with treatment. So proactive is I'm establishing a relationship, just like I do with my other providers, or I've had something that's happening and I'm seeking that treatment, right? Or you're healing, but either way, you're maintaining. So again, you could be entering into this continuum at any point. The point is to understand that you're always thinking about your mental health in some way, shape, or form, and you're either preventing disruptions to it, you're addressing disruptions to it, you're healing from it, or you're maintaining it. And that's what we want to do. But again, I want to urge you, I can't urge this enough as I close today, to seek professional help, right? Especially if you are having, right? So going back to what I talked about earlier, how do I know if I'm making that transition from I'm just waking up, I'm having a bad day, to I really need intervention? You think about this. If you're having persistent feelings of sadness, anxiety, or hopelessness, difficulty functioning, the things that you love and enjoy to do that you just don't love and enjoy doing them anymore, you're having changes in behavior, Maybe you're sleeping more often, or like me, oh, I don't want to be a mother or a wife anymore, or anything that's interfering with your daily life on a consistent basis. And it goes on just like that shoulder. You wake up, you wake up, you wake up, seek that intervention. But again, if you follow that continuum, right, then you've already established that relationship. And it's much, much easier for you to transition into the treatment, the healing, and the maintenance before something inevitable happens, like what happened with me. So, as I close, I want to close with this. You don't have to limit your thinking. You just need to limit it to control yourself, right? If you think about that, right? So, again, be in tune with what your mind is telling you, just like we're in tune with the rest of our bodies. And that's how we can go from, as my new book is saying, how we can go from being burned out, unmotivated, and unhappy to reclaiming our mental health at work. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to engaging with you in just a minute. But I will hand the reins over to the moderators.
Perfect. Thank you, Natasha. Every time you speak, you're just so relatable. I mean, every single time, everything that you say is just amazing. I appreciate you so much for.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we've had a lot of great questions. Before we get to the questions and kind of wrap up here with some of the safety culture discussion, I wanted to show kind of where you stand on what options were here. And so the question was, what is one of the most common misconceptions about mental health? This is how you answered it. That question, the correct answer to that was B. People with a mental health challenge can't be productive at work. And we know that that's not the case. It's not something that, while you may have things that you may be struggling with, that does not mean that you can't hold down the job. And obviously, I think we see the proof of that every single day. Yeah. So we'll use that to kind of move forward and talk through some of how it is that you can make that happen. How can you build those environments? And so, Dara, I'll come to you first and let you kind of open up here and just, you want to share what we've done personally at Axiom, and we can kind of go from there?
Yeah, at the beginning, I talked a little bit about our why, and I know Dr. Kertay talks a lot about this. The pandemic didn't cause necessarily a lot of these underlying issues, but it definitely revealed a lot of them. And Natasha talked about dealing with some of the George Floyd components. We went through a lot over the last 3 years as a nation, as companies, as people. And for us, we have a lot of employees that are nurses. We know that nurses as a group, Holly is included in this, don't always take care of themselves very well. They tend to be, they're caregivers, and they are amazing employees. But what we realized during the last 3 years was we were very focused in our service delivery towards physical health. We were looking to protect employees that were at work from COVID. How do we support medical surveillance? How do we think about these different components from a physical health standpoint? And when we think about the way Axiom works for our clients' employees, we're looking to be upstream and early intervention. We're looking to support employees in the workplace when they're injured as quickly as possible, when they're dealing with other components with what they're looking at. We're looking to do that early and manage that intervention quickly. And then when we were looking at our own employees, we are a company that definitely supports annual physicals. We really work towards employees managing their health in ways that really were supportive from a physical health standpoint. We had an EAP, and when Dr. Kertay started with Axiom a couple years ago, he said, "Okay, well, who's your EAP provider?" And every executive and every HR person we looked at each other and we're like, I don't know, we've got one. But who the EAP provider was, what the phone number was, it was something that when we were here physically in the office, we had posters up and we would send out emails reminding people. But then we went remote, and then we went to a place where you're in your home And yes, we know we've got resources, we know they're there, but how do we reach employees where they are physically in their home, knowing that they're putting in probably more hours than they ever put in the office, and that they were reaching levels of burnout for sure. And I know we've talked a lot about what burnout is. The word gets thrown around a lot, but I think when you've experienced burnout, and we can talk a little bit more about that, you really know. And we were looking for ways to support our own employees as well as our clients' employees. And there's not a single way to do this. There's not a single support system. There's not a single insurance provider solution that will hit all of the different components, because it is so tied to culture, training, all these different things. But we started doing step by step the things to walk our own walk, and Dr. Kertay led that initiative. So the first thing we did was ask our employees, how are you doing? What can we do? How do we support you? What it turned out, just by asking employees, we found out that yes, they were very stressed, but it wasn't just work stress. It was family stress. It was child care stress. It was a lot of different things that led to employees feeling stressed, but they bring that whole self to work every day. So even though a lot of employers, I hear this constantly, why should I care about my employees' personal lives? That's their personal benefits. I don't care. And I'm not saying that most employers do this, but there's a real distinction between work-related and personal. But the problem is when you make that kind of distinction, employees are bringing both to work every day. And when you've got employees that are stressed because of personal reasons, it's not that we need to change that for them, but if we run scared from having those conversations, then we do a real disservice to our employees. So we started with asking them what they needed. The next step was doing a lot of mental health first aid training with our teams. And so what that does is break down stigma and break down the ways to support employees through language, culture, through these changes. So if I, as a supervisor, ask an employee, how are you doing? I really care about their answer. I don't look for fine. I look for a real conversation and a real connection. And if an employee says I'm not doing well, I know what I should do next from a supportive and caring supervisor. I don't, like you said, it's not an automatic handoff to HR and EAP, because that isn't necessarily the right answer for everybody. So there's a lot of different things we can do. And then we started doing, we have our own app that we sell to clients, and we have nurse case managers that are trained in behavioral health. We rolled that out for our own employees. And that check-in is a resilience check-in to say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you feeling able to work today? And that gives you a resilience score. And it's just like you made this point so well, Natasha. We are so clued in when people are getting their annual physical. What's your blood pressure? We ask everybody, what's your blood pressure? Do we ask anybody, what's your resilience score? How are you able to work today? And so we started measuring that. And one of the best stories I'll say after this, and I'll pass it back to the panel, was we started a Wellness Wednesday check-in so that employees would be checking in and reminded to check in every week. So they could do their resilience score, check in. And if they're struggling, they get resources through our nurse case managers. And then if they need additional resources, we get them into therapy or into an EAP program. What we did was we did this check-in. One of my product managers set it as a Teams meeting, and it was supposed to just be a reminder, but instead it was a meeting. And so we were all watching this, and all of a sudden this meeting started. Hundreds of employees started jumping into this meeting, and Dr. Kertay was like, oh no, okay, I better show up. I better join this meeting. And so it became a meeting that we now have weekly. It was all done by accident. It was just meant to be a reminder. But what it did was it showed us that our employees, now remote, were craving connection, and they were craving an interaction that was different from, hey, who did did the product team complete the roadmap today? Did we, instead of task driven, instead of this type of engagement, it was an engagement that's sometimes silly, sometimes fun, sometimes sad. I'll have to say that, suicide has been a topic recently in the last few months with different big names that have committed suicide or different things. So employees feel comfortable to bring that to that conversation. But then we also talk about silly things like our jobs when we were in college or food that we're making our families. But it's so important because it brings us outside of the day-to-day work life. And I love your idea of harmony. And that idea of harmony is where this conversation for 30 minutes a week, the whole company can get together if they're able to and share happy things, sad things, or whatever they need. These are the steps that we took. And when you talk about these squishy things, I know sometimes in HR and in operations, we're all looking for metrics. We're all looking for these things that drive productivity and turnover, and these things that HR is held accountable to, operations is held accountable to, our whole companies are held accountable to. Well, what we found was this directly affected things like our ENPS scores, our turnover, both, and just how our employees were engaging with the company. So it wasn't the reason we did it, but the downstream effect of these things are measurable and they're real and they make a big difference for a company. So it makes a difference for an individual to feel like they're supported, but it also makes a difference in the downstream effect of some big things that are expensive in companies like turnover and healthcare costs. So that's the
$1 trillion productivity loss that I talked about.
So I'll pause. I'll pass it back over to Natasha or Les to kind of react to some of the things I've said.
Oh, we got to hear from Les. We got to hear from the clinical. I got to hear it. So take the mic, please.
Well, it's a really interesting way to put it, because what I love about this conversation that I've been talking about a long time is that we have to talk about mental wellness across the whole spectrum. That, our tendency is to think, as soon as we think mental health, we think mental diagnosis and treatment. And so we throw the same solution at everybody. But the thing is that it's everything. It's like we're all stressed. Whenever I'm in an audience of people, I say, raise your hand if you're not stressed. And I figure the one or two people who do it are being smart alecks or they're deliberately lying. It's across that whole spectrum, from stress to psychological symptoms that, most of the time just need human contact. Like, we all feel anxious from time to time. We all feel depressed. We have down days. Most of the time what we need is contact. That doesn't necessarily need treatment. And then there are conditions that will benefit from treatment, and we have to talk about that whole spectrum. And I think that's a lot of what you talk about, Natasha, is we're really talking about the whole thing. The other thing that occurs to me to say in this is that, a colleague of mine and we're going to do a presentation at a occupational medicine company shortly, asking the question, like, is it time to just abandon the mind-body dichotomy? Like, why do we even make that distinction between mental health and physical health? It's like, name me a feeling that somebody has that isn't accompanied by brain activity and that doesn't have a physical symptom associated with it. They don't exist. Right. Same thing the other way. Name me a physical symptom that doesn't bring up thoughts and feelings. Doesn't happen. It's all one thing, and it's time that we've kind of developed a language for that. And the last thing I'll say, at this point is, I think there should have been another slot on the poll that was all of the above, because I've heard all of those, and they're all misconceptions. It's not just that you can't be productive. It's one of them really stood out for me, and interestingly, it was the one that people picked as the most was, it's not appropriate to talk about it in a professional setting. There was 1 year into the pandemic, somebody did a poll, and I'm sorry, right this minute I'm not pulling up who did it, but it was a good sized poll, and a survey, and it asked the question: how many people have talked about mental health in the workplace in the preceding year? And it was much bigger than anybody expected. It was like 70%.
Yeah.
Weighted toward the younger workforce, which is what we're seeing. Interestingly, only 47% of those people indicated that they thought that it went well. Right? So, okay, it's one thing to say that it's appropriate to talk about it. It's another thing for the rest of us who are in leadership positions or who are managing or just colleagues to not freak out when somebody says in response to, how are you doing today? I'm not doing so well. Like, I'm having a hard day today. As if we can get rid of that mindset that means there's something wrong, that I need to intervene or that I need to refer you for treatment. If we can get rid of that and just have a human conversation with somebody, I think it will make a huge difference in workplace culture and in total productivity. I mean, people show up for that, right?
And I think you're right, Dr. Kertay. My foundation actually did a survey very similar to that. And another outcome of the conversation was, oh, hey, I was diagnosed with, A, B, C, D, bipolar disorder or depression, whatever. And the response was, well, there's an assumption that you're no longer competent or capable to do your job. And a lot of times I'm not sharing this with you to say, I want to get out of something, because I think that's a common misconception as it relates, as I've been in HR roles where leaders think, oh, they're saying that because they want to get out of their job. They want to get out of doing something. That's not why they're sharing that. People are still capable of continuing in their jobs and still exceeding expectations, but that may just look a little different. I may need a little bit of different support from you or different hours. I'm still capable. But a lot of the responses that we got on our survey was kind of a retaliatory type of response when they've shared of, okay, all of a sudden my job responsibilities diminished, my work was given to someone else, or I got low performance ratings, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's understanding that when people share with you they're struggling with their mental health, they're not telling you that they're not capable of doing their job any longer, or it's not an excuse to get out of something. And I think that's a huge challenge that leaders have to overcome in that aspect.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Hey, Natasha and Les, I wanted to ask you kind of a follow-up question. It's something that came from a call I had with a company yesterday. We were talking about mental health in the workplace, and the person was, I think, a safety supervisor. And they said, it's really interesting when somebody says they're struggling and we tell them to go to HR, why would they ever necessarily go to HR when that's the person who's also going to fire them potentially? It's, and I kind of sat back, and, it's something that we all think of, but when you said the thing about people might be feeling a lot of anxiety because of uncertainty in the workplace right now, because of the reality of layoffs and other things. And we tell somebody that if they're struggling, oh, we'll just call HR, or HR can give you the name of the EAP. Why would anybody go to HR?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you should come to HR. And I'm saying this as a former head of HR, because we usually are the only ones that have those resources that you need. So going back to when you said earlier, when Les asked, oh, who's your EAP provider? And there was crickets, because usually that's just something you don't know off the top of your head. But HR has those resources of EAP or whatever else may be available for you. If you need time off, we can tell you what that looks like. We can give you the paperwork or disability. But that's all we should be there for. We should be kind of that tail end. That conversation should be with your manager in terms of, I'm struggling with my mental health. This is what you can do to support me. And, oh, by the way, here, if you need additional support, then go see HR. So I think there's a misconception, that HR will fire you. Okay, a lot of times we don't have that decision-making authority. Maybe you sit in the room, but it's your manager that's firing you, or that's made that decision to do that. It's illegal, number two. But again, it should be there for resources, because we are kind of the gatekeeper of all the resources that you would have available, and resources, time off, those types of things. But as we all know, that's typically not enough. We've had that in place for many, many years now. And even when I reflected on my own experience and thought back to being in that chair and thought about, well, what would I need in this moment as an HR provider? I didn't have enough, right? So that management involvement is crucial to the conversation. And I think that we need to bust that misconception as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I'm an ex-HR person too. And I was being a bit facetious when I said that, but it is something. That's another stigma, poor HR is kind of.
HR is stigmatized. I tell you, if I call somebody and see my name show up, they're like, oh, I'm in trouble. Like, I give good things too.
You're like, I get pay raises too. Like,
yeah, good news,
But I do think that's really important to point out, and I do think that the resources sit there. But I do think also, there's a lot of the culture of an organization needs to support these conversations. It's not HR's job to be the ones to support those conversations. I think you're exactly right.
It's part of management. It's part of managing your employees, and again, I think for a lot of things that managers rely on HR, like the tough conversations, no matter what it is. And that's why HR has gotten this bad rap of being the grim reapers, because we've avoided the tough conversations. So let's go see HR. They got something to tell you because I don't feel comfortable. So we've got to do a better job at just giving the advice and support and guidance to managers so they can manage that conversation.
Excellent point. Yes. Dr. Kertay, before we get to the questions, and there are some that are really, really good over here. I have questions about support groups, all kinds of things. They're really good. Could you clarify the difference? We've talked about it before, but not in today's presentation necessarily. The difference between burnout and a mental health issue that they may be experiencing. So, how do you tell whether you're just burnt out or whether you really have depression?
And I need to know that, because I told you I thought I was burned out, and come to find out I was having a bipolar depression episode. So what should I have known to distinguish the two?
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, the best definition that I have for burnout, and I'm sure it's not original to me, but it's chronic stress for which you lack the resources to cope, right? You've been chronically stressed for a long time. And I think burnout is almost an unfortunate word. I loved your slide with that metaphor of the burned out match at the end is like perfect. I think unfortunately it's almost gotten to be a synonym for stress, right? And they're not the same. Chronic stress is something that, many of us who are in high pressured positions, we experience, or, and that can be at any level of the organization. It can be a leadership pressure, or it can be production pressure. And it's chronic, but at different times, maybe now there's something going on in my life. Maybe I do have a developing or a chronic mental health condition. But at some point, my ability to be resilient, my ability to bounce back, my ability to cope with that chronic stress gets overwhelmed. And then what we see happen is people start to get really, really tired. They start to disengage. And the number one hallmark for burnout in my experience and what I read is cynicism. When you start to get cynical about the rest of the workforce, nobody else knows what they're doing. My boss doesn't know what he's doing. My coworkers don't pull their weight. When I start hearing people say those things, I have two questions simultaneously. One is, maybe it's true. Maybe it is a toxic environment, or maybe it is an environment in which people aren't being held accountable and therefore not pulling their weight. So maybe it's true, but maybe, and this is what the question to ask is, maybe that person is bordering on burnout and they're just overwhelmed, and it's time to have that conversation. I don't think burnout creates mental health disorders. I think burnout reveals them, and I think sometimes triggers them, right? An underlying condition, but they're two separate things. And they respond to different kinds of interventions. That's my take on it, and at any rate, we'll call that Dr. Kertay's potshot theory of the moment.
I love it.
But I think it's important to distinguish them, and I think it's important to say, if I say I'm burned out, it's more than I'm stressed.
Right.
I'm like I'm at the point where that match is like about to go out.
Yep.
And and it's time to do an intervention about that.
Yep.
Right. Dr. Kertay, I think you had told me one time, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was you that had said that, if I'm feeling like I'm burned out, I go on a vacation, and that vacation helps it after the 2 weeks that resolves what some of these issues are. That would be maybe an indicator that it was more burnout, more so than maybe depression or anxiety.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've also said, if I'm burned out, I am absolutely convinced that the only thing that will make it better is a month in Puerto Vallarta. It's got to be some big solution, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is that I haven't taken that 10 minutes that I needed to go for a walk across the street. I didn't take the day off. I'm embarrassed to tell you that for 10 years of my corporate life, every single year I gave away at least a week and a half to 2 weeks of paid time off.
Yeah.
Until I finally figured out, what was the point of that? They weren't going to pay me more for it. It's like I'm better when I take that time.
Yeah.
I'm better at my job when I take the time that's given to me.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But it's often when you're burned out is when you start to think, oh my God, it's huge. It's like I got to quit my job. I got to get divorced. I got to sell my house. That's another, I think, hallmark of, okay, wait a minute. Maybe I should start with baby steps.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start with small things and take a break.
Agree. Great points. Yep. Are you guys ready to jump into some questions? We've got some good ones for you.
Oh, it's some good ones. I've been reading through. I'm like, okay.
Good.
Let's ready.
I'm going to be out of gifts by the time we get through with these. Yes. So many great questions. Yes. All right. First up, Victoria was asking, should you designate a separate pool of days as mental wellness days, or should they be added to your sick day balance to bring attention to the fact that it's entirely acceptable to use a sick day for mental health and promote it by adding additional days? Who wants to take that one?
I'll start. I've seen organizations do both, where they add on, you just have this pool of PTO that you can use whenever. Or, you have additional days that are designated as a mental health day. Some organizations shut down, like, oh, we're having a mental health week. We're not even going there. We're going to Puerto Vallarta or whatever, wherever you need to go. I think the importance is not necessarily how it's classified. Where I have seen there be an issue is when you have this stringent time and attendance policy where employees are penalized for taking unscheduled time. And to me, that's the distinction between PTO and a mental health day, because PTO, usually with most time and attendance policies, is scheduled, right? I'm going to tell you, Holly, I need next Wednesday off. I get approved, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say I'm really struggling with my mental health. I need mental health days to see if this is burnout. Do I need a medical intervention? So I'm calling in. And you have these time and attendance policies where, oh, this is unscheduled, so I'm going to write you up because you are taking unscheduled time off, which I never really understood, that I'm giving you time, but then I'm penalizing you for using it. So I think that's the advantage of having the separate mental health day pool, because you can build into that, hey, this is for your unscheduled time off, and you're not necessarily sick, right? Because if I take a sick day, then a lot of times the assumption is I'm in bed, so that means I better not be seen walking through Central Park or going to a movie or whatever it is. But for a mental health day, that means I'm engaging in something that's going to take me away mentally, where I can relax and whatever that is, and I'm not shamed for being out of bed or being out of the house. So to answer the question, the short answer is yes, I do think that there are advantages to having a mental health pool. Number one, you can take them unscheduled. Number two, I can use them as I need, as I prefer, and there's no expectation that I'm actually sick and I'm in bed and I can get called out at a Broadway show and not feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Really good points.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I think if you know your culture and you know that any of the managers have any kind of stigma or reaction to taking a mental health day, then I would really advise just adding days to your pool and allowing people to take them. If you have a culture that allows for that and that really is accepting of it, then I think it's good to call it out as something separate. But I think people have to know their own culture and know, you know, is this truly going to be just one of those, you know, you get to take a day, you know, for whatever reason. So but I think, you know, pointing out that it's okay to take that time to take a break, just to take a break. That's okay. I think that helps.
For sure. Greg was asking, do we have resources that he could use to aid in the proposal for a mental health initiative from a safety perspective? Absolutely, Greg. We will follow up with you after this and help you out with some resources. Tom had said, just wanted to thank Axiom for providing these webinars. Dr. Kertay provides very helpful insight. I always enjoy seeing him on these webinars. You know what, Tom? We do too. We love him. He's fantastic. He is fantastic. All right, Elizabeth with that was asking, when your employee comes to you and admits that they are contemplating suicide, but do not wish to go to the emergency room for fear of being committed, what is the recommended next steps as an employer considering legal recourse? Do you call the authorities? Do you call an ambulance? What would you recommend? Not everybody at once.
So I've been in this situation before, and I'll let Les give his clinical advice, but I have been in this situation from an HR standpoint. And I have said, just like I have if someone reports harassment, discrimination, they say, don't tell anybody, just put this in the back of your head. I just want to let you know. I say, I appreciate your concern of what may happen, but now that you've shared this with me, I have an obligation to protect your safety and well-being. And I've notified security. I have called, you know, and whatever happens, you know, happens as between them and the medical provider as to whether or not they're put on hold or if they're admitted, et cetera, et cetera. But I do tell them from an HR perspective that I have an obligation for their safety, for the safety of others, and that we're going to get them help, you know, and, you know, I try to give them as much support, as much empathy as I possibly can during that process and keep them calm. But that has happened a time or two. And I will tell you, in those instances, both of those employees have come to me and thanked me when they return to work for that intervention. But that's just from an HR perspective. There's no handbook on it. It's not in the EEO guidelines or anything like that. That's just my philosophy. But Les, I'll let you give from a clinical perspective.
Well, it's really the same. I mean, you know, once somebody has said that, and I've also had the experience that then the person says, well, everybody thinks about suicide from time to time. It's like, well, no, actually they don't. And having said what you said, my job is to keep you safe. And, you know, and I'm going to do anything that I can to make sure that you're safe. The only thing I would add at that point is maybe I would work with a person in a work. I'm talking about in a work setting. You know, I'd give them choices. You know, how would you like to go about getting to some help?
Yeah.
You know,
I like that.
And support people through that process, not just automatically call the police or call security, but you know, I mean, we do have corporate responsibility, but we also have responsibility to that person, and we're not abdicating it by giving them choices, but the choice is not, I'm just going to pretend that you didn't say that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely
And you're
agree
right.
with
And there
you.
have been in those instances where I've had a workforce health and safety. So I've just alerted security, hey, I'm taking this person to workforce health and safety. And, you know, or I've worked in many health systems, or we're going over to the emergency room, you know, and but I do just alert security just so they know and aware of the situation. Just because I know sometimes in those instances, they don't know at that time they may be a threat to others as well as themselves. So just to ensure, but yes, again, given the choice, support them throughout the process, make it as, you know, less embarrassing and, you know, as possible. But I think we both agree that one of the options is not to do anything and to say, well, you know, good luck, you know, here's EAP, you know.
And I think you both said it with such compassion too. It's not just a cold, hey, we're calling 911, you know, sorry, good luck. It's there's a compassionate component there where it's like, hey, I'm concerned, this is serious, and I'm going to do what I can to help you and the rest of the team here. And I think that you could do that in a way that really diffuses the situation. And I would say that our nurses get calls like this a lot too, because clients, it is a safety risk, and it is something where sometimes people do feel uncertain of how to handle it. So we do get a lot of those kinds of calls. I don't want to say a lot, but we do get that on occasion, and our nurses help coordinate all that for our clients too, because sometimes just having that, we always say it's just having that nurse in the boat with you as a calming influence is super helpful.
Yeah. Good point. Let's see, we'll go to the next one. I'm not going to say the name, but how do I know whether I have a clinical diagnosis versus struggling emotionally for a season? Once the pandemic hit, I'm a lot less resilient to stressors. And let's see, what was the second part of that? As a father and a husband, I'm expected to be of a certain composure all the time.
Wow. You know, I remember the talk of, you know, people will be familiar with Brené Brown, who talked about, you know, she first focused her work on shame on women. And then she talked to a man who said, you know, people would rather see me suffer than see me knocked off of that white horse that I'm supposed to be riding, right?
Wow.
I mean, that's a real thing. It's a real pressure, but you know, as a dad, having been a dad to 6 kids, I can't be a good dad unless I'm taking care of myself. So that part of that question just sort of reached out and grabbed me. I mean, really, I don't think that any of us can self-diagnose. You know, the difference between when we need, you know, some additional emotional support or when we have a diagnosis. First off, it doesn't matter that much. If we need help, we need help. And, you know, if it's serious enough that that you're worried about it, I would find someone who can help you make that diagnostic determination. And, you know, a lot of us, because it's hard to find good mental health care, a lot of us will use our primary care doc for that purpose. And the only thing I would add to what I just said is, if that's the way that you go to primary care, don't just let them throw a medicine at it.
Yeah.
Right? Make sure that they spend the time to talk to you, or make a referral to somebody who will, because it's bigger than that. It's not just, hey, I'm feeling bad, here's a prescription for an antidepressant, thanks, have a nice day.
Yeah.
And people don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I don't want to dismiss primary care and say that they're doing that on purpose. They have limited time, you know, they're trying to be helpful, but stand up for yourself, like advocate, you know, let's have the conversation. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you need help, you need help. And, you know, you need to find someone in the workplace. That's a great use of EAP, by the way. Make the call, tell them what you need is. You need to talk to somebody to just get evaluated to see kind of what direction do I need to go in. It's a perfect use of EAP.
I really liked Natasha's point about it not being a journey and it being a continuum. And Dr. Kertay, I've heard you talk about this a lot. Just because you even get a diagnosis, that doesn't mean it ends there. And it doesn't mean that that's forever. It doesn't mean you're going to be severely depressed every single day the rest of your life. And I think we forget that too. I forget it. A diagnosis is a starting point, and it's a point where you now have some other tools and some levers, because if you have a diagnosis, then all that does is it starts your process for what's the next thing, how do I manage this in different stages of your life. And it's continuous. Like you said, it's a continuum. This continues. There's not a diagnosis, a medication, a destination that ends. It's not the way it works.
Right.
And I love when Dr. Kertay talks about that a lot of people that end up diagnosed with a condition, that doesn't mean that that's it for the rest of your life, and that you know, sorry, that's it. You know, we think about cancer as a diagnosis, and we talk about all this language about cancer, fighting it and surviving it, and there's all this war language. It's like we're going to battle, and it always kind of disturbs me a little bit. Yeah, you ring the bell, you're done. It's done. It's,
exactly.
You know,
but I think it's important, you know.
Yeah. No,
just even without a diagnosis, that you're on that continuum somewhere, even if you're on prevention. You know, I think that you don't wait for a diagnosis to have an intervention. You, again, I think that just to amplify the message of, you know, developing a relationship with a mental health provider, just like Dr. Kertay said, we're going to stop bifurcating mind from body. You have your primary care physician that you have a relationship with. They have your chart. They know when your numbers have changed, et cetera, et cetera. You want to do that same thing with the mental health provider. And then they can tell you, hey, this has been going on. I've talked to you for several months. And, you know, you thought it was because it was winter. It's July. We're having the same conversation, right? So it's so important that you're on that continuum with or without a diagnosis, even on your feel-good time, so that you're developing that relationship. Because we all know we get the best care from providers that we have a relationship with. They know us. They know the changes in our body and our number, and we're vulnerable. We need to stop. We need to start doing that same thing.
Wonderful point. Wonderful point. Yeah. Somebody else I heard recently say this too. Having a therapist, you know, even if you just start that relationship whenever, it gives you a parking spot for things that you're dealing with. You go, oh, I've got therapy in a couple weeks. I can bring it up. You know, it gives you a just like with your doctor, you're like, oh, you know, we all think, like you said, the armchair expert in Google diagnoses. If you're Googling whatever pain you've got and you think, well, I've got my annual visit with my doc in a couple of weeks, parking lot it, I'll deal with my doc there. And it's the same thing with mental health. It's like, you know what? I'm going to take a break. I'm not going to stress about that today. I'm going to leave that for my therapy session in a couple of weeks, and we'll deal with it then.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. parking lot it for sure. Let's see. There's been a lot of questions about, is this recorded? Absolutely. This is recorded. And after this event, you will get a copy of that. We also put the replays on our Axiom Medical YouTube channel. So if you want to view this one, you can find it there, along with all of our other webinars that we do every single month. So that's a great place to look for some additional resources there. Natasha, Georgia was asking, when is your book going to be available?
So it's actually available for pre-order now. You can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go to Amazon, you can go to walmart.com and get it. But the release date is June 1st. So that's when you'll get it in the mail. But it is it's for pre-order now. It's called Crazy AF, got to go from being burned out, unmotivated, unhappy to reclaiming your mental health at work. And get your mind out the gutter. AF means and fearless, right? And just so you know, I'm not weaponizing the word crazy, because we get that, right? We want to use our language, right, in an inclusive way. When I think of being crazy, I'm not weaponizing it towards a medical condition, but I'm thinking about, let's do some fearless things. Let's think out of the box, right, as it relates to our mental health, in terms of things that we just started talking about, developing relationships with therapists and doing all of these things that we haven't done before, right? That's right. What I mean by that.
Yeah, good. Let's see. Rob was asking, or had mentioned, it was very true, I assume, what we were discussing earlier, but how do you deal with the fact that asking for help is considered a sign of weakness or not able to perform the job? I love this question. I was thinking about you, Natasha, whenever we were going through this, and especially when you mentioned the invisible task, the things that we let pile on top of us. I'm sure many of us are type A personalities, and so it's like we want to keep on getting more and more done. You know, we think that we can always get ahead of the curve. I think that's been my biggest lesson from the pandemic moving forward, is that accepting that I'm never going to be caught up. Like, I'm never going to get ahead of something, because there's always something that's going on. It naturally changes and will continue to feed in. So this idea that if we stay in our offices, more working from home until wee hours in the morning, it's not like it's doing yourself any favors. You know, you're not going to have a jump on the next day and feel like that you're already on top of things. It just means that you're tired. Then in addition to that, then you start your list that continues to grow. Anything else you want to add there, Natasha, for that one?
I mean, it's just prioritization. I'm still working on it, but I try to wake up and say, you know, what's important today? There's never an end. I mean, I don't know about for you all, but for me, there's never an end. That list continues to get added on to. And so I've just, you know, had to reconcile with that. I'm never going to get to the end of this list. What am I going to prioritize? And being okay if I don't even get to those things, you know, and that's taken me a while to get there, because I'm very task oriented. Like, I love checking off, marking off, all those types of things. But I'm okay if I don't get to every single thing that I need to get to. It's going to be there tomorrow. It's going to be there the next day. If not that, something else. So again, going back to that harmony, I'm working, and I'm a work in progress, I'll be honest, but that, you know, trying to create that harmony situation, and being specific about adding to that list, not just work related tasks, but those personal things as well, and mixing those two. Yes, because we don't do that. We just do all these work. I gotta. So just like I talked about with our physical hygiene, you know, I got to brush my teeth, I got to wash my hair, I got to get my feet done, got to go do this, I got to do that. We got to add that type of those personal things that give us preventative for disruptors to our mental health on that to-do list, and be just as excited about marking those off too. So that's what I am in progress. Like I said, I'm a work in progress, but that's what I'm trying to do more and more.
Me too. I think we're all a work in progress. I have a free quick tip for people who make to-do lists.
Okay.
Always put at least 3 things on it that you've already finished.
Ooh.
Make the list, check them off. Watch what happens.
Love it. Then you feel accomplished. You just go back to bed.
That's right.
You are so true.
I love that.
was looking at my list. That's the first thing you put on there was make list, and then you can scratch it off. So at least you can say I've done
There you go.
That's what I do. Make list at the very top. That's the first entry I make for every single day. Like at least I know I got one win here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, let's see. Karen was asking, especially after COVID and the world events, mental health resources for employees have months-long waiting list, and so she was asking, are there other resources that can be offered until therapists are available? That's a really good question.
If I can, and I know less but I will tell you that. So again, that was a gap that I realized after my mental health is we don't have enough licensed mental health providers within our medical benefits network to support our entire workforce. That's almost for every organization. I think nationwide it's like 300,000 people to one mental health professional. So, or 30,000, I'm sorry, to one mental health professional. So you don't have enough, but there have been some amazing platforms that have popped up that you can get quicker access to, that I've even though I have a psychiatrist, I have a therapist, but again, like you said, Dara, their parking lot, that's every month or that's every 2 weeks or whatever it is. Sometimes I need to talk to somebody sooner than that. So I've been able to use platforms like ZocDoc. You can go in, you can see they have their calendars. It's video, they have their calendars. I've gotten things the same day. I've gotten things the next day. You can read their bios, et cetera, et cetera. And there are other platforms like that are up that have availability. It can be a one-off. You don't have to be in a long-term, engagement with them, but they definitely can help you in those emergency times, or you can establish a long-term relationship with them if you need to. But those platforms are out there. There's a ton of them, and I have definitely been able to utilize them for me. I had to utilize them recently for my daughter, who was experiencing as a teenager a mental health crisis, and was able to get her in the next day to talk to someone, and it was life-changing for her.
Yeah, great. Anything, Dara or Les, that you want to add to that?
I'll add two things. One is it's one of the reasons that we put into the solution that we built at Axiom, that we put in the nurse as a kind of a navigator, because sometimes what people need is mental health treatment or evaluation for treatment, but sometimes what they need is resources. So here's a website for stress management ideas or whatever. And so to take some of the pressure off, because not everybody needs a therapist every time. Right. So but for ourselves, we can do some gatekeeping here. Like, do I really need a therapist here, or is there another way for me to get support? The other thing that I would add is that, and I say this a lot, like with those services, as well as when we do go out looking for a therapist, we shop for everything. We shop for shoes. We don't shop for therapists, and we should. If you find somebody and you're talking to somebody and it's not a good fit, just ask to talk to somebody else. Yep. It's okay. And I think it's really important because that fit is really important. And sometimes you're going to get hooked up with somebody that's not a good fit. I mean, it happens at EAP. It happens all over all the time. It's important to be okay with, hey, this just isn't a good fit. It's not that they're a terrible person, not that they're a terrible therapist. It's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
So, don't give up.
Yep. Yeah. Agree. Sherry had just kind of given us a statement here, but was saying it's not a question, but I found that when I can freely speak about my mental health, it's like a weight's been lifted.
I feel you on that one.
Yeah. Another question about EAP, they were asking me, if I contact EAP for an issue that's affecting my job, is it recorded in my personal records? That's a great question. I think there's a lot of people that have that. Dara and Natasha, either one of you want to take that one?
Want to talk specifically to, I know the answer is, but Dara, you want to talk specifically to Axiom?
Yeah. Yeah, no, EAPs, it's anonymous. So when you've got an EAP set up and you get referred out to an EAP or you call them, they hold all of your information private. That's personal medical information, that's private information. They do not share any of that with the company or the organization. But one of the downsides of EAP is that they're not utilized very often. And so if we're trying to, as an organization, drive utilization to the benefits we are paying for. One of the downsides of EAP is often, as an HR person, if I ran an EAP or if I was the one to be the primary manager for an EAP program internally, I often didn't hear about utilization until well after the fact in terms of percentage of utilization. So if I have an EAP program and 3% of my employees are using it, well, I'm glad that that 3% is using it, but I want 100% to be able to use it, or whoever needs it to be able to use it, because that's a benefit that we're providing. So that's like what Dr. Kertay said. That's one of the reasons we've inserted our nurses into these processes as a coordinator to drive utilization to the right resources, because often employees just aren't sure what they need or when they need it or how they should use different resources. And so for us, we are able to see aggregated data now more quickly so that we know that employees are using the resources that we're providing and the support. But it's always anonymous. None of that information is provided back to the company. So you should feel comfortable using those resources.
Yeah. Let's see, Tara, one of our friends over at MedCore was asking about how is it that we can better serve each level of the mental health continuum. Anybody have a quick answer on that one? We're going to take that quickly for each of those steps. Natasha?
It's just actively be engaged in it. So, the prevention, actively engage in things that prevent you from entering into a mental health crisis or disrupt your mental health. Seek treatment if you feel different, if you have some things that are disrupting your mental health. Heal. A lot of times we experience trauma in our lives that are unaddressed, and that could contribute to mental health crisis. And then that maintenance part, right? Putting all of that together means you're maintaining your mental well-being. So just really being actively engaged in at least one or more of those stages is the best way to, really optimize it.
Great explanation. Yeah. Let's see. Colton from Hunter Douglas was asking, what are your thoughts on medication management and the varying professional that can prescribe? And so they give an example. In Maryland, nurse practitioners can prescribe medications for mental health patients. Is it better to go to an MD for medication management and avoid being misdiagnosed? Les, do you want to take that one as a...
Sure. I don't think that there's anything inherent about going to an MD for mental health prescription than a nurse practitioner, any more than for physical conditions. I think that it's the training and competence of that person, right? There are probably certain things that are complex enough that you really want a psychiatrist who's well-trained, who can sort through all of the different things. But, often I don't think it much matters. It really matters whether the person's well-trained and competent. I think that's a better way to think about it than, family practice nurse practitioner is not going to be as well-trained in mental health as a psychiatrist or as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, right? So that's the way to think about it, I think.
So does that mean like you wouldn't buy a hamburger at a pizza plate? You go to the Mexican food place and you wouldn't ask them to make you a pizza? They can, but it may just not be the best. That may not be what they're
Depends on whether I want a really good burger or not.
There you go. Yeah. Let's see. Liz was asking, what are some of the other things that people can offer, that employers can offer their employees other than EAP?
Increased mental health benefits. One of the things that I was really impressed by when I got to Axiom, when I found out about our benefits, is that, as a company, we were self-insured, and we paid a little extra in order to have the same copay for mental health services as for primary care. Yep. Simple thing, right? Didn't cost a ton, but it made it more accessible. So instead of a specialty visit, now it's a primary care visit. Telehealth solutions for mental health can be made available to the workforce. There are other ways to make that happen. Dara talked in the beginning about what we've built and made available to our internal employees. So there are other things that can be done, and they're not necessarily really complicated.
Right. Yes. Let's see. Let's do, I think we can squeeze in two more. Let's do the first one, which was, what can you do? Actually, I love this one from Mel from Sheldon. Said, in our organization, the EAP wasn't effective. It takes too long to connect with appropriate assistance. And for this reason, they started a peer support team that was trained in critical incident management support to bridge that gap to professional assistance. Heck of a job, Mel. That's awesome. I love hearing that you guys have came out with some different solutions to work around that. Tiffany was asking, I'm wondering if there's guidance for supporting pregnant employees and those transitioning back to work. She's saying as a working mom who's transitioned back, it's really stressful and it's hard to talk about in a male-dominated workforce. And so the question was, I know mothers and fathers feel even months after with sick care. I don't know how we talk about that. This is a really good point. And I think this is something that every single workforce faces, is those big life moments. Who wants to take that one?
Mm-hmm. Sounds like that's another webinar.
It does.
We could say a lot about that one.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, where do we start? I mean, it's all of the above. I mean, I think that it goes to, there's so many things that we could take this. I think having the conversation and supporting returning parents is really an interesting and important conversation. I mean, we're going to talk about it next month. The way we work isn't working very well. And missing that gap. We've had so many women specifically leave the workforce over the last 3 years because of childcare issues and other things. I don't even think we realize yet where it's going to play out. We had a sociologist I believe from Yale School of Medicine, but we'll go back, and it was one of our webinars, and he said the effects of this the last 3 years won't be felt for a while. Like, we're not going to really see it. There was problems in the workplace with supporting moms coming back and parents, not just moms, coming back for a long time, but the pandemic certainly highlighted some of these challenges. So to be determined. Let's have another webinar about it, and let's talk a little bit more about it.
All right, one last question that we'll cover here, because I really loved it, talking about recovery. So Maggie from HR Connectors was asking, lots of people are responding to the stress and anxiety with increased drugs, alcohol, excessive and unhealthy eating. Are businesses addressing potential recovery meetings for stress and anxiety? I love this question. I don't know that anybody's doing it, but I think it's a fantastic idea. Natasha, are you aware of any organizations that have something
I'm not, but I do know that, yes, the consumption of alcohol definitely increased during the pandemic. And I think that's being self-aware, was noticing that you're consuming alcohol or drugs, or you're coping with stressors in unhealthy ways. And I think that's a great idea for organizations. I think there will probably it's going to be hard because there's still so much stigma around alcohol abuse, substance abuse, and people may be hesitant from a work standpoint to come together and say, hey, I'm abusing. But I do encourage you, if you do find, have recognized that you're consuming more than a healthy amount, or you're consuming to cope with other stressors, to engage in a lot of things that we've talked about today, and find, intervention to help you with better and healthier coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Guys, I appreciate all of you. We're at time here. What I will say is the questions that were here that we maybe didn't answer yet, that gives us some material to also work into the next month on the way we work doesn't work. So we will be following up with each of you. You should receive a little love note from me later talking about a gift. But thank you to our panel and for the great insight that you gave. Natasha, you're always such a treat. We just love hearing you every time, and just relatable, and it makes so much sense. So thank you, Dara, and thank you also, Kertay. And you guys, again, this is recorded. We will send you a link to that, and then also you can find that on YouTube. So we will see you next month. Be sure and click that register now button on the right side of your screen at the top if you haven't already, to make sure that you save your seat there. Thank you so much and have a great week.
Oh.